Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks, the highest win rate decks on MTG Arena for each of the respective formats. This particular video is going to be for the standard best of 3 traditional standard ladder. So we're going to be looking at the decks that are generating the highest win rates, as well as just the kind of comparison between the popularity of decks and the the corresponding win rates. As always, we get the data from Untapped.gg, what you see on the screen. This is a companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, tracks your own win rates, aggregates it with other users, gives us a whole bunch of cool stats. The the Untapped can be found in the video description. If you want to get started, I'll paste all the deck lists, timestamp them, so don't worry about copy pasting. And if you happen to be looking for standard best of 1, Explore, Historic, Alchemy, check out the playlist. We cover them each week based on the data available. For Explore and Historic, given that the new anthologies will be out on Tuesday the 18th, I actually did some day 1 deck lists, so if you're interested to see what can be played in those formats, those videos are already up, and that's kind of the week that's leading up to it. But once the set goes live, we can take a look at the other effects as well. So we are looking first off at the popularity of the day, and then we'll look at the last week's stats. So ignore the 9th through now tag. Really what we're just looking at is the last 24 hours of gameplay played. So Esper Control is the most popular played deck with Dimir Mid-range just very narrowly behind it, 0.2 percentage points. We have Mono Black Control. It's kind of like that mid-rangey shell at 10%. So we have 3 double-digit decks in terms of meta distribution, all decks playing black in some capacity. We also have 5-color Domain, the Attracts Piles, Mono Red, Esper Legends, Orzhov Midrange, and Azorius Control. If we look at popularity, just kind of some of the trends, we see that the Dimir Midrange deck continues to kind of keep around this like 10 to 15% over the last couple of weeks. We also see the Esper Control deck with a similar kind of line. Both kind of got popular after some of the bannings, and then just kind of the meta shifting. In terms of other decks popularity, we see Mono Black in the last few weeks has had quite a bit of an increase overall. It was as low, if we look at like July 1st, of 3.7%. Now it's up to double digits itself. And then when we're just going to jump into it, we'll take a look at the stats themselves. So we are looking July 9th through to the 16th, Platinum to Mythic rank, 25,000 games of best of 3. One thing I noticed is just might be the ladder reset, might be folks aren't playing as much standard best of 3. Usually by this point, I am able to kind of shift the parameters up to either all Mythic or Diamond to Mythic. But doing so, I only got like 2 decks. So there wasn't much being played in that vein in terms of diversity itself. Those 2 decks were Mono Black and Dimir. Or no, there was a Domain and Mono Black that were up there. But if we're looking at the stats themselves, Mono Black has the highest win rate of the week, 63.5%. So you can keep banning stuff out of this, but as long as Shieldred's around, it's going to hold together a deck. Shieldred is just a ridiculous card, and this is kind of the old Invoke shells. They've swapped out the Invokes for Gix Command. This allows you to have like a mainboard sweeper, force your opponent to say sacrifice an Atraxa, buy back some creatures from your graveyard in grindy games, and then just give counters and lifelink to a creature on your side. You have your early drops in Evolve Sleeper, Tenacious Underdog, get some Curse of Value, some card draw. The Graveyard Trespasser, Graveyard Hate, Life Gain, just tough to deal with creature. Lilies for kind of grind advantage, you can force your opponent to sack a creature. And then 8 pieces of mainboard removal, along with the Flesh Gorgers, which can either be cast for 3 or for 7 mana. And then the mana base, fairly simple, so Mishra's Foundries, Takenuma. Sideboard, Duress for like the control matchups, the kind of mid-rangey, grindy matchups, Razor Slash for greedy mana bases to keep coming back, Edict for Planeswalker decks, Path to Peril for any low to the ground, aggro, kind of wedding announcement style shell, Arena for the grindier games to draw you cards, similar with Sorin. And then Shieldred's nice because in the grindier games you can pick off like a single big threat, or it can also deal with planeswalkers from your opponent's side, while the True Scriptures is a hell of a card if you're able to flip it and kind of get that going. From there, we go to Dimir Midrange, and there's actually 2 versions going around. So we're going to highlight both, even though the second version isn't necessarily the next sequential, but we're going to take a look at it nonetheless. So The mid-range list, it's very similar to that mono black list we just looked at. So your cut downs, Go for the Throats, Evolve Sleeper, Underdog, Trespasser, Lily, Shieldred, but you're backing it up with counter spells and various card advantage elements. So you have things like Make Disappear for counters, same with Urtai. So this helps against the bigger mana decks, things that are trying to go over the top of you. Hard casting Atraxa, hard casting Sunfall, the Eternal Wanderer, Breach the Multiverse, Atali, any of those kind of cards that kind of just beat you by going bigger, you have counter spells available for that. Misery Shadow is another creature to put some pressure on early, and then Kaido as a card advantage engine. Mana-based bunch of duels, as well as access to the Myrex. Sideboard, you have cut downs for more removal, duress for hand hate, a variety of different counter spells between Spell Pierce, Disdainful Stroke, and Negate for big mana decks. You have Razor Slash again for the kind of greedy mana bases, recursive element, Phyrexian Obliterator for the creature decks. So if you do happen to run into mono red, this mono red cries when they see Obliterator. It's just a big body that they can't really attack into. And then some copies of Gix Command, as we mentioned, for that. So there's that version of Dimir. Then there's also the Dimir Birds version. So this is at 59%, just a shy under 60%. So this version is using Aven Heartstabber. So 2 mana, 1/1. If there are 5 or more mana value of cards in your graveyard, it becomes a 3/3 with Death Touch. And flying, when it dies, you get to mill 2 cards and then draw a card. Pairing that with like Fairy Mastermind, as well as Ledger Shredder. So lots of cheap ways to kind of draw cards, fill your graveyard, get some value there. We got some scam going on. If a creature dies, you get to bring it back under your control. Works really nice with Flesh Gorger. Play it for 3 mana, it dies, then it comes back. This version's on Gix. Since you have a lot of cheap evasive flying creatures, it's a way to draw some cards as well. As similarly with Kaido, having a bunch of cheap creatures that can kind of fly over your opponent means you get more attacks in. Cut down, Rona's for like bounce, Spell Pierce for counter, and then your top end is like Shieldred, the Apocalypse, Shieldred regular, and then Teferi mixed into there. Would maybe want to see a Myrex in the mana base. In the grindier matchups, that's very good. March for removal and life gain, some just counters like we mentioned. Siphon Insight's very good against the kind of grindy big mana decks, steal their best cards. Deluge for the white kind of go wide strategies. Trespasser for graveyard hate, harder to kill or threat. Lily for the control decks. Gix Command as like a sacrifice. Sweeper, Shieldred again as mentioned, good against like the bigger mana grindy control-y shells. And then Gix Command, Cruelty Gix, good to kind of pick out your opponent's hand and then give you some reanimation. So if your opponent's playing a deck where they might be playing Atraxa, you can potentially steal their Atraxa that way there. Moving on, we see a deck we haven't really seen much in Best of 3 recently, and that's Mono White Aggro. So this is a deck that does very well in Best of 1, but Best of 1 tends to be much more linear. In Best of 3, we're seeing kind of the human shell. So you have Coppercoat Vanguard, Thalias, Intrepid Adversaries, Hopeful Initiates, Recruitment Officers, all mixed in with like Adeline, Brutal Cathar, and Extraction Specialist. Split of Cathar and a Specialist. Just given that a lot of the threats, there's a lot more, as we saw in those first few decks, cut downs and Go for the Throats, just removal that gets the Brutal Cathar, so it's not clear removal. The Extraction Specialist gives you rebuy value out of it. A couple copies of Phyrexian Vindicator. If they don't have like hard removal, this can kind of redirect damage, be a big threat on its own. And then Steel Seraph notably gets around Go for the Throat style effects. Can be played again as a 3-drop or a 6-drop, and notably can give things like the Adeline Flying or Lifelink and Erase, stuff of that nature. You have Ossification as well as Fateful Absence as removal. Sideboard, you have Destroy Evil for enchantments or bigger toughness, Fateful Absence just as removal for creatures, direct creature or planeswalker. Invasion of Gobokan kind of is like a Thoughtseize that you can attack, and then give you the Light Shield for protection. Cathar's removal, Extraction Specialist for the heavy removal decks, Wedding Announcement for the kind of control-y shells, makes it a little bit harder to deal with, and then a couple copies of the Wandering Emperor. From there, we go to 5-color Domain, and this is at 60.3%. So this is kind of your ramp package. So Topiary Stomper, Invasion of Zendikar, get you ahead on lands. And then from there, you're just going to cast bombs. You go to Atraxa, Itali, Herd Migration can either be casting for 5/3/3s or help you early to find your land drops. Kaya and then Tyrannix Rex in the main. Bunch of removal, Ossification, Archangel of Wrath, Sunfall, and Leyline Binding. Keeps you alive until then. Your sideboard, Lithomantic Barrage for white or blue things, Disdainful Stroke for like the mirror, big mana stuff, Negates as Counterspell, Chromhost Seed Shark. When they don't have a lot of removal, you can bring this in and it kind of lets you go wide. Any spell you cast gets you more value. Knockout Blow for the aggressive decks, especially red, Tyrannix Rex for the heavy counterspell decks, and Vanquish the Horde. One card that we've seen in sideboards in the past and may be reasonable is Elish Norn Mother Machines. A lot of the removal in this deck, whether it be Ossification, Archangel of Wrath, Leyline Binding, Atraxa, Tali, these all have Enter the Battlefield style effects. So Mother of Runes really shuts off this deck in that regard. From there, we go to Esper Control. So the most popular deck of the format, and it's at 55. So it's the version that is basically just all control, wins through like 2 Wandering Emperors. This version's a little bit more proactive. It had a couple percentage points higher of a win rate. The hard control version was like 52 or 53%. This version here was at just a little over 55%. So you're just playing a lot of removal, cut downs, go for the throats, counter spells, edicts, Liliana's, Void Wren's very good at just dealing with any troublesome permanent. Deluge for card advantage, Emperor kind of mixed into there, as well as a Sunfall and Farewell. This version's on 4 Trespasser main, as well as 2 Underdogs. This gives you a recurable way to kind of put pressure on your opponent, and then the Trespasser can gain you some life, and then just be a wall if needed. Plays really nicely in this deck, because you could control the day and night cycle very well, by just passing the turn with your counter spells up. Kaya at the top end as well, as a Myrex in the mana base to help you try to win through grind value. Sideboard, you just got more removal, hand hate, counters. Sunset Revelry is good against the aggressive decks. Gives you life and creatures. Lockdowns, similar idea, deal with the aggressive decks. Shieldred as a way to gain life in certain matchups when they can't kill it. Sunfall, and then Farewell when you need your sweepers. Speaking of mono red, we go to mono red aggro, 54%. It's been the stock list for the last couple of weeks. Just very aggressive. You got your Tarkirs. Think of it as kind of like a Bone Crusher giant that can allow you to attack into it when it's relevant. Kumanos, Swiftspears, Phoenix Chicks, just lots of aggressive things. 8 pieces of burn with Bloodthirsty Adversary to flash it back. Furnace Punisher to punish those greedy mana bases, and Warcrafting Kit, Planeswalkers, or creatures, and then potentially give you some card advantage. This version's on the 4 Mishras, just really going into that. I don't love 4 Mishras, to be honest, in this deck. You have a lot of 1-drops. And to me, it's just, if you get like a Mishra and a Mountain in your opener, and you have like a bunch of 1-drops, you can't really multi-spell, but I guess with best of 3 being a grindier meta, then could be potentially valuable. You have Barrages for the white matchups, Obliterating Bolt for 4 damage, Bloody Betrayal for Atraxa, Shieldreds, anything of that nature, big mana things. Planeswalker package for the grindier matchups, Sweeper package, like decks with sweepers, stuff like that, between Chandra, Jaya, and Koth, and then Nahiri's Warcrafting to deal with like Shieldreds or 5 toughness creatures. Now, lastly, Esper Legends was an interesting one this week. It didn't actually have enough games played in the last week to register. Looking back at like the last month or so, because it was, if we look at the meta, Esper Legends is showing 58% win rate in the as of today, but just wasn't being played a lot. There's a couple different versions of the deck. I'll paste one in there if you're interested. This one seems to be doing the best right now at 63%, but it's kind of your core Rafine deck that's been there for a while, kind of slight changes here and there. I'll paste it in there if you're interested, but this is like a month's, even more, like a month and a half's worth of data, and we're just getting kind of mixed, varied in terms of like percentages, stuff like that. So I don't know how recent this 140 game sample is. So I'll include a list if you're interested in it, but we didn't have enough games played to have a representative list of what the current iteration, and especially a deck like Esper Legends, changes a lot each week. It's been towards the top, it's been nowhere to be seen, it's all over the place in that respect. Then lastly, I just want to kind of highlight the MTGO League. We had a standard challenge. It was won by Fur MTG, who's actually, so we have the Swiss, but Fur finished 6th in the Swiss, was on the mono black deck that we see, notably in this version playing 1 Breach the Multiverse on the side. I guess for like the big mana decks, 4 Duress is really nice in the sideboard there. But if we're just kind of quickly looking through what was being played, in the Swiss, the kind of hard control version of the Esper deck was played. So this is winning through Wandering Emperor or Sunfall primarily, and then a couple of Myrics in the mana base. So it's just kind of all answers. Finished best in the actual Swiss. We had Mono Black as second. We had one of the copies of this Mono White Aggro deck that showed up. So similarly that we're seeing on the ladder, we saw this in the challenge, third place. Mono Black, Mono Black, Mono Black. Dimir, so kind of the Dimir deck that we just saw. Mono Black, the ramp deck. So this one looks like just soldiers, so kind of the Flash Soldier version. So this version's on like Destroy Evil, Make Disappear, Protect the Negotiators, and then you have Zephyr Sentinel and Resolute Reinforcements as Flash and threats as well. 3 Invasion of Gobukan. So kind of a tempo, mid-rangey kind of version of the deck. Mono Black, ramp, so not much, a lot of folks on the Mono Black. This one's kind of cool. So it's 14th place. It's a Dimir version. Sorry, a Golgari version of kind of the mid-range. So Glissas, you have some Vorinclex, Shieldred. Kind of an interesting kind of shell here. Azusa, Many Journeys. So playing into Storm the Festival shell. It's kind of cool. Don't see that too often. Mono Red. So big story here is Mono Black really had a good showing this weekend. Kind of bet up on a lot of the competition. So let me know in the comments what you think, what you've been playing, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.